to be a leader, you've got to get someone to follow you, haven't you? To lead. If people won't follow you, though, I suppose almost by definition, you're not a leader. Can you learn leadership skills? Yes. However, you still got to have some base level to work on, which is why some people cannot hack it, because they don't have a base level of honesty, integrity, vision, enthusiasm, competence.
And humility.
And humility.
Welcome to the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustance, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Hi everybody, it's Barry Eustance here from the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast. Let me tell you a story. In 1997, I was rostered to fly a W pattern to Orlando. I went to Manchester Airport, I went to a hotel, and there was the captain sitting in the bar, drinking non-alcoholic beverages, I have to add. And I asked him what his background was, and he said, general aviation. And I looked at him and I went, you sure? And he said, yeah. And there was Steve Johnson, former Red Arrow, former member of the Synchro pair, airline captain, airline training captain, now chief instructor at Ultimate High at Goodwood, and a great friend of mine. Steve, welcome. Welcome to the Just Great People podcast.
Thank you, Barry.
Steve, we're here to speak ideally about any subject you care to mention, but particularly something that you're right up against in terms of your historic career and continuing career, about high performance teams, leadership, and how to make all of that work. Basically, would you like to give us a little bit of a brief intro about how you got into the whole business of the flying game and your stellar career doing lazy eights and chandeliers?
Lazy eights and chandeliers. You missed out on my Harrier career, Barry. Historic, and what was the other one? Stellar. I'm not quite sure.
Stellar, historic. Yeah, I was hoping to leave just a little bit for our listener, our dear listener and viewer to glean from you without me spoiling it. But now you have. So yeah, take me through it.
Already. Okay, potted history. So I joined the Air Force in 1978. I said that quietly so the youngsters understand where 1978 was. And then progressed through the training system and managed to scrape through the selection, and then just managed to get through basic training, advanced training, and sneak off to the attack weapons unit at Chivener, and then just managed to sneak onto a Harrier course at the 233 OCU at RAF Wittering, flying the Harrier. So spent a few years doing that out in West Germany with number 4 Squadron. Then I made an application to the Red Arrows, and they said, don't be silly, no boy from Norfolk can fly for the Red Arrows, that'd be ridiculous. But luckily I happened to know a couple of people on the team, so that was quite useful. And I applied first time, didn't get through, but the second time I applied, I did, and joined the team at the back end of 1987 for the 88, 89 and 90 seasons, because you do 3 years on the team. And yeah, that's how that happened.
And you had a little excursion in Belize in the Harrier, defending Her Majesty's Empire at that stage, I understand?
Yeah, I did a little bit of time in Belize. I did 4 detachments, all of which were 2 months long. So they were a nice little zoom around the jungle in our 4 jets we had out there, it was absolutely marvellous out there. So we'd fly in the morning and have lunch. So rather pleasant, actually. And lots of other stuff that goes on in Belize with the army and things. That was quite good fun.
And then from there was it to the Red Arrows from there, Joss, or what happened between Belize and the Red Arrows?
Well, the Belize was just part of detachment from 4 Squadron in Germany. So I was posted to Germany, but out there temporarily. We'd done a stint in the Falklands after the war. Our squadron went out to provide the air defence capability for the islands from October 82 through to February 83, and then after that we're back to Germany, defending the Western world against the Soviets, of course, the Soviet threat at that time. Belize was just a detachment of 4 aircraft, which was filled up by people from 1 Squadron, 3 Squadron and 4 Squadron, with just 4 pilots, so quite a nice little detachment, really. But after that, I'm back in Gütersloh, so I did a display year on the Harrier, and then decided that I'd like to try and get one of those nice little red suits.
Which you did.
Yeah.
And perhaps you could just brief us on what were the key selection criteria for someone who was eventually adopted into the Reds with the associated red flying suit. What were the things they were looking for?
Well, you'd have to ask them that, Barry, wouldn't you? Come on.
Come on, Joss, you know what they were looking for.
So,
and our dear
day,
listener and viewers is desperate to find out now.
Back in the day, and now I'm not quite sure if it is the same now. Okay, so we'll just caveat that with it. It was in the late 1980s. Firstly, you had to be a fast jet geezer, and you've had to have had at least one or maybe even two tours on a fast jet. So essentially proving that you could possibly do a little bit of flying yourself. And then the rest of it was an interview that lasted a week with some social and a couple of interviews with the management, senior officers asking you why you want to wear a red suit because you like red, perhaps, I don't know. But essentially it came down to a character issue. What happens is that you have to apply and the applicants get whittled down to a certain number. In my day, that was 9, and 9 people would turn up for a week's worth of flying with the Reds, sitting in the back and getting scared and thinking, yeah, this is good fun. And there's lots of machinery very close moving around. It doesn't look like that from the ground, but it does in the air. So you do that, a lot of social with the team, and then essentially you go away and they then cogitate over what you were like. And if you're lucky, you get selected.
And for anybody who wants to have a look at that process and what happens thereafter, there's a wonderful video on YouTube called Quiver of Silver. Am I correct, Joss? That actually is actually contemporaneous with Joss and the rest of the team. A lot of whom actually joined us in Virgin Atlantic, and where we both flew. Joss and I both flew the Virgin Atlantic, and we not only flew the Virgin Atlantic, we got involved in all sorts of other things as well. So what you hit there was character. Why was character so important, and why is it so important, Joel?
Well, if you go back to, you asked to do this podcast about teams and what are essentially good teams and what makes a good team. So you have to have people in your team that I would say almost on the same wavelength, but you and I both know that if you put 5 pilots in a room and try and get them to go to a restaurant, it's like herding cats, right? So it's not an easy issue and it doesn't always work. But essentially, you've got to have people who are focused on what they're doing and they're going to fit in with the team. You asked me why character was important in a team, and it certainly is on the Reds, because if you get the wrong kind of character in the team, quite a lot of bad things can happen. Sometimes people hide their character, and that's why that interview process normally lasts for a week. So, yeah, you want like-minded people who are focused on the job, who are able to do that. Now, if you've selected them from fast jet operators and they're pretty experienced, will have had to have developed a fairly resilient and strong character, enabling them to give honest, clear feedback to people who are not doing so well, and also be able to take honest and clear feedback if you're not doing so well. So that is really critical, that you've got people who can not particularly take it personally, but get on with fixing something that went wrong, acknowledging that and then fixing something that went wrong.
And that does translate to every other sector, doesn't it? The ability to actually give constructive and receive constructive critique and use that positively rather than perceive it as a personal affront that then gets your back up, gets you on the defensive and puts you in the wrong place from an interaction perspective and a leadership perspective. Is that fair?
It's completely fair. And that's how it certainly was on the team when I was on it. Some people might have considered it pretty harsh from a directness point of view. Having been on the Harrier Force for a couple of tours, I can tell you it's not particularly harsh compared to the background of training and operations on the Harrier Force, because there were really no prisoners taken. And if you weren't able to take that kind of criticism and change your behaviour or whatever you were doing or fix the problem that you had, then you didn't last very long on the squadron. In fact, you'd be gone fairly quickly. And this is the thing that makes people have a level of resilience that enables them to take criticism without losing their temper, without going, oh, it wasn't me, it was him over there. It was number 4. You have to be able to deal with that to be able to move forwards in a team, because a team will always make mistakes. People will always make mistakes. So, but what the important thing about that is to try and recognize those mistakes and then put them right, and then try not to make them again. And on the Reds, that was a real critical issue. You were really expected that if you had made a mistake, you'd be like, yeah, boss, yeah, got that, yeah. So I was number 5 in the first year. Often the phrase used is 5's wide. Yeah, boss, okay. And I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. But and you then have to put that right. And if we had several little things where there weren't really little things at all, but they were very near or actual slight touches in the formation and we had to go through the video frame by frame because we'd video everything.
And sorry, just for our dear listener and viewer, when you say slight touches in the formation, what you mean is
a little bit of touching of red wings and things, but only very slightly, because if you hit pretty hard, and we can get into that in a bit if you want, then things go pretty quickly, unfortunately.
And what sort of speeds are you flying at, and at this stage when you have a little bit of touching going on, roughly?
Well, it varies, to be honest, because it depends on which part of the show you're in. And we had an event where we were doing what we used to call a spaghetti break, which is a diamond loop and then breaking into a big bomb burst like this, which is a fantastic maneuver. And at one point we had very slight touch between a couple of the airplanes down the back, and we had to look at the video because all of the shows and every single practice is videoed, and we had to look at that, I think probably for 20 minutes, just frame by frame, to figure out what had actually happened. And all that had happened, there was somebody had gone slightly out of position on the brake, and that compromised the safety, and they very slightly just touched each other. There was no damage, significant damage, but it was close.
Just a paint job.
Yeah.
And that emphasizes the importance of character and the ability to give and receive criticism and accountability, which we'll park for the moment in terms of the leadership side. I didn't mean to interrupt your flow, Joss, but I thought we might expand that point just for the benefit of our listeners and viewers. So please continue with the story.
Well, that story was sorted because we sorted it out, and the two guys figured it out who were involved in this and changed that very slightly, and it didn't happen again. But that just, the tolerances involved are quite small, as you can imagine. So that's why you can't really accept, in the Reds anyway, you can't really accept continuing errors, because if you have continuing errors, then somebody's not been able to put them right. And that, back to the business earlier, if you've done something and you've made a mistake, put your hand up, say, yeah, boss, that was me. And then you change what you're doing or get better at what you're doing, and don't make that mistake again. Because if you do make that mistake again, then you're on thin ice, basically. Certainly in early days training, when you first join the team, you become an FNG. Apparently they don't have them anymore.
Perhaps we'll let Google deal with decoding that.
I thought you might. We could do. Yeah, but everybody knows an FNG. Actually, it comes from the Vietnam War.
Yeah. So we point to Google for that one, folks. We won't expand upon that particular expression. Just another point, picking up when you went, yes, boss, you are actually referring to, there was one person on the team who was called the boss and referred to as boss for shorthand, clarity, and also clear authority.
Absolutely correct, yes. The Harrier Squadron was not dissimilar. The boss is the boss. You had the executives, flight commanders underneath him because you had a bigger outfit. But yeah, you got one boss. And once again, the boss would brief, the boss would debrief, and out of the people that said anything in the group, there would be, that was my fault. Sorry, boss, sort it out. Or maybe the deputy leader, or maybe 6, because you've got a hierarchy of positions on the team. Obviously, the leader is 1, and he's clearly the boss. And then the most experienced person after that is 6, because 6 is the Synchro lead, and he's in his 3rd year.
That takes us and segues us very neatly into the Synchro pair with John Rands. John and you were there in that your first season as the Synchro pair, and perhaps just you could explain what the Synchro pair means and the differences that brought about in your life.
How about the differences? So the Synchro pair, once again, we would fly a show which involved formation aerobatics with 9 ship going around, very nice, with some changes, all sorts of different patterns, with loops, rolls, barrel rolls, and passes. And then what we would split the display up into 2 halves. The first half would be very nice formation aerobatics, and the second half, as it was known, was split between a 7 ship and a pair. The pair were the Synchro pair, And the aim of that from a choreographical point of view was to have a little bit more action going on. So some dynamic crosses that happen with synchro pair. So that in itself was, if you join the team, most people wish to join the synchro pair, but if you're lucky, you get selected. And that position of number 7 is chosen by number 6, who was the previous year's number 7. So it kind of goes up the ladder, and then 6 chooses his next 7, and then you practice your little bit by yourselves, fix it all together with the main section. But the synchro pair is obviously a little bit more specialized than the actual Reds itself, because on the Reds in the main formation, you're formating off the boss. Now, not everybody realizes that, but even 8 and 9 are formating off the boss. 7's at the back of the diamond, he's formating off the boss. He's using 6 to figure out what's going on, but everyone's formating off the leader. Because if you try and formate off somebody who's moving around a bit, it's a lot more difficult. So yeah, most people want to join the synchro pair because it's a lot of fun. You get to do some solo aerobatics down to 100 feet, which is great fun.
And at closing speeds of?
Well, you're doing about 350 knots each, so 700 knots, I suppose, give or take.
700 knots, which add on 10%, well, add on 15%, that could be miles an hour, folks. It's over 800 miles an hour. Closing speed at heights of?
100 feet.
There you go.
That's our minimum height. We're allowed legally.
So it certainly focused the attention and concentration, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, having been a previously displayed solo airplane, it's not a complete stranger to it, but the height levels are, because you are down at 100 feet and you don't really display. Even the military display teams would be down at 250 or something like that. There's not a lot of difference, to be honest, but yeah, it's exciting. Let's put it like that.
And huge amount of teamwork between you and the other member of the synchro pair, and also the rest of the team. Now you're firing at each other at over 800 miles an hour at 100 feet, and that's where teamwork really, really counts, or certainly
absolutely
at its most critical.
Yeah, it is, because once again, back to that making errors and putting those errors right. So you asked me to, do this podcast thing, and I do have a very simplistic, or maybe you think it's simplistic view about what makes a good team. There are many things that make a good team, a good leader, etc., character, integrity, honesty, all of that stuff. However, I think there's one significant thing that makes a team work properly, and that's, I would call it mutual trust. Okay, mutual trust, not just trust, but mutual trust. So if you think about that on the team, all of the other 8 geezers who are following the boss have to trust him, because if he's going to fly us into the ground, we're going to be on his wing. So we're probably going to end up in the ground. If we don't trust him, then we're not focusing on formating. So we will not do a good job. And if he doesn't trust us and we don't individually trust each other, then we don't have a team. So I think the glue that holds a team together is mutual trust. And I think you can run that across into Formula One pit teams. I suspect they have to be competent, confident, resilient, but they have to trust each other to do their job. I'm sure Lewis Hamilton has to trust the guys that fit his wheels, doesn't he? So that's my very simplistic thing about how to have a good performing team. And it sounds easy, but it's not.
No. And the leadership, both at the boss level, but also within the team, because each member of the team needs to demonstrate leadership as well. What are the characteristics? What are the key points that you feel really make that dynamic work, both individually and collectively as a team, Giles?
Okay, integrity and honesty. So there's a team within a team, if you like. So you've got the team itself, the 9. You've got a manager. He's part of the team. So he organises all of the stuff that you don't have time to do because you want to focus on that. You've got the ground crew, the blue suiters. That you have a little team yourself to your aeroplane. So when you walk out to your jet, you don't have to do anything. You just get in it, because you've got a team of people who are working for you. And there's a level of mutual trust in that. There's each individual has a level of what you might call leadership in that team, but that team will also have somebody who's in charge of it. So you've got a hierarchy of people within teams. So on the Reds, you've got the boss, then you've got the third years. So the third years will be the deputy leader and 6. So they have more credence than the second years and the first years, who are only just FNGs. They've just got past that now, so they're not quite FNGs anymore. So there's a hierarchy of position in the team. However, having said all that, the first years are experienced second tourist fighter pilots. So they're experienced guys. So they know what to do. And they will have their team of ground crew blue suiters who look after their particular airplane. So that means that everything is very slick, very slick. Not dissimilar to pit crews, working on cars in the Formula One stuff, where they are just amazing, aren't they?
Absolutely. Tony Underwood and I have run a podcast, and Tony was alluding to the British Lions when he was playing for the British Lions, and I asked him the same question, and he talked about care, the care that each person had for the other members of the team, and vice versa, played a massively important part for the Lions. How did that play out in the Reds? Was it the same?
Yeah, I don't know if care would be the word that I would use. Understanding and awareness of other people, of what they're up to. Fighter pilots are a bit git-like, really, aren't they? It's a bit like on Tom Cruise when he says, that's a bit arrogant for this company, because, I like a bit of arrogance in a fighter pilot. So there's a bit of that, so, and you can't get around that because you've hired people who have done a couple of tours on a fast jet, and there's pecking orders in fast jets, The Harrier geezers will take the mick out of some of the other guys. I won't mention the Phantom pilots, but, and some of my very good mates were Phantom pilots. Fantastic airplane. But there's a hierarchy of pecking order, if you like, and I'm sure that is the case. So I'm not sure if I would use the word care. Do we care about our teams, our ground crews? Absolutely. So I would know all the names of everybody on my team. They would know exactly what I wanted. Everything would be ready. They'd be like, perfect. Just like the guys on the Formula One teams. So there's a degree of care there, I suppose. I go back to the
But
trust.
it must work the other way. I mean, the crews themselves, the diligence with which they go about the preparation of the airplane and preparing for a display and so forth shows a huge amount of care, doesn't it? And vice versa. Every time you're sitting there in that formation, there's this kind of mutual involvement in a hugely dynamic and potentially very dangerous maneuver, isn't there? And team environment.
There is, but I don't think people are thinking it. Well, certainly I wasn't thinking of it in that way. More, I've just got to get into the right position. You've got to get into the right position, or because you're out of it. I'll give you an example of teamwork on the Reds. So when I was 5 in my first year, because I'm a first year, right? My number 3, and I'm flying outside of him, and we're doing a wine glass roll. That means 5 line abreast at the front. That means 5, and we're rolling left. So I'm on the outside, we're in line abreast. Now, line abreast is a tricky formation to fly. Anybody who's done any close formation flying will know that the references are trickier, and it is difficult. And then to roll a line abreast 5 is quite tricky. So we're in training, and Tim Miller was a boss, excellent boss, great leader.
Afternoon, Tim.
Yeah, and the excellent boss, great leader. And outside of him, number 3 was Dom Riley, who you also know.
Afternoon, Dom.
We were doing the wine glass roll. Anyway, we're doing the wine glass roll, and Dom, unbeknown to him, is moving out doing the first part of the roll about 3 feet. Not much, but I'm on his wing, right? So I can feel him coming towards me. So I instinctively move out. So by the time we come around the back side of the roll, I'm trying to get back in, and on the video, 5, you're wide. 5's wide. Thanks, boss. Cheers. Yeah, I know. And I don't say anything at this point. So we do it a couple of times. 5, you're wide. And then eventually I have to pull out the Harrier pilot debrief protocol. It's like, well, listen, Riles is pushing me off the side. And he's like, no, I'm not. So we go through the video, and sure enough, frame by frame, once again, you can see Riles just move, and he didn't know he was doing it. It just happened. And he just moved about 3 feet, which was enough to push me off the side. We went back and did it again. He never moved. After that, not so much of the 5's wide. And if it was my mistake. So there we go.
And after the Reds, you went through Virgin Atlantic. I think we're going to have to do this in another podcast, because it's the Reds stories and learnings have been significant in this podcast alone. And can we come back and talk about the next stages, because you've got such a fascinating history and story in terms of leadership and teamwork. If nothing else, my own view is that right now the world needs more leadership, better leadership, and more honest leadership.
Well, yeah, there you go. You've hit the nail on the head. Honesty. You need honesty
absolutely.
and integrity. And if you're talking about politicians,
well, it's an interesting story, isn't it? Honesty, integrity, and ethics, really, really critical. But if we are just to just circle back, just as a summary of your views, and I know that you're teaching leadership and teamwork all the time now, in your current incarnation as chief instructor at Ultimate High, and we'll come on to that in the next podcast, because we are going to get Joss back, aren't you, Joss? You're going to come back, and
I'm sure, because you're paying me so much money.
No money has changed hands for the purposes of this podcast, folks. What has changed hands is a lot of technical issues trying to get this podcast online. Can you give us, please, Joss, the high-level summary of where you think people's heads needs to be in terms of high-performing teams and leadership? Smoke on, go.
I mean, you don't ask much, do you? So leadership, leadership is a difficult thing to define, is it not? But I don't think transactional leadership is leadership. So leadership, high level, honesty, integrity, strength of character, resilient, ability to listen to a team, and some level of enthusiasm and emotional interest in what they're doing. If you're the manager, you're organising stuff and you're making stuff work, and that's great. But leadership is more visionary, if you like.
And the ability to take and receive, give and receive criticism and deal with that constructively.
Absolutely, 100%. Because leaders often make mistakes. They often do stuff on the team as well. And the reason I say that Tim Miller was a great leader, because my 3 years there, not one single time did I think Tim was going to plant us in the earth. He got an angle wrong or something like that, because I'm behind him, obviously. And when I'm 6, I'm thinking, I don't know what you're doing here, boss, but it's quite interesting. But, he had the ability to take that on board and sort that out and change whatever needed to be changed. So, that. And what was the other bit?
Well, the ability to give and receive criticism and deal with that constructively. And the other thing, Joss, I'd like to ask, because you've seen a lot of it through your career, can people learn leadership? Can they acquire leadership skills?
I think the answer to that is yes. However, they've got to have a base level to start from. To be a leader, you've got to get someone to follow you, haven't you? To lead. If people won't follow you, though, I suppose almost by definition, you're not a leader. Can you learn leadership skills? Yes. However, you still got to have some base level to work on, and which is why some people cannot hack it, because they don't have a base level of honesty, integrity, vision, enthusiasm, competence,
and humility.
And humility. Yeah, and humility. Exactly. Competence. So, I didn't mention that, did I? Competence. Nobody joins the Red who's not very good. Even people who don't make it are very good, but they just they can't do it for whatever reason. Sometimes that happens, not very often, but it does. So there's a level of competence you've got to start with, and then you add that to the character issues that we just talked about, and you can learn leadership, especially if when you stuff it up, you can go, I've stuffed it up, I better not do that again. Figure out what you've done and take on board what people have said to you. And of course, if we go back to how you debrief people and if you're honest and open and straightforward, that often works. What doesn't work is when there's some intended dig, or there's some ulterior motive that goes on with debriefing people or briefing people or giving them feedback on what they can do to improve their performance. Some people just can't take that, but most understand it and take it in the right way are able to do that.
Perfect. Steve Johnson, former Red Arrow, training captain, long haul captain, and now chief instructor of Ultimate High. Great insights. It's taken a lot to get Joss on here, folks. And we're going to get Joss back again, kicking and screaming. I know, but he's always got pearls of wisdom. I've known this man for 28 years, and he's got a lot of wisdom in there, and we're going to extract it bit by bit. So listen, from the Just Great People podcast and Steve Johnson and me, Barry Eustance, thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Barry. Bye.
Many thanks for listening to our Just Great People podcast. And you can really help us. Please do remember to like and subscribe, and please share this podcast with everybody you know. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you. So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Success Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time, and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.